Hey everybody, welcome back to Race of History. Today we're going to jump into the Sabaton history for Last Dying Breath. This is the defense of Belgrade. Obviously, we talked a little bit about Serbia and World War I when we did the song for it, but I held off on a lot of it because I wanted to get into it when we did the Sabaton history. So let's go ahead and jump into it. Sabaton history's Last Dying Breath.
I'm Indy Nidell.
I'm Per from Sabaton, and this is Sabaton History.
Per and I first met when he was a guest on my channel, The Great War, to talk about the history behind the Sabaton songs that deal with World War I topics.
And The Last Dying Breath is one of those songs. It was about the defense of Belgrade.
When the First World War began, the might of the Imperial Austro-Hungarian army descended on little Serbia. That didn't work out so well for the giant.
And our song, The Last Dying Breath, was inspired by a legendary speech.
Yeah, I talked about this in the song, but the whole premise of the build-up to war was the Austro-Hungarians basically being able to roll over Serbia and roll over them quickly. Even if everything had worked out perfectly, the whole thing was still premised on the idea that Serbia would fall quickly. And if it didn't, even if everything else worked out great and the Kaiser wasn't, gone for forever and there wasn't this long stalling whenever basically the Kaiser had told the Austro-Hungarians to go quickly, even if none of that happened, the whole thing is still premised on the idea that Serbia quickly is taken by the Austro-Hungarians, and that doesn't happen.
The fighting in the Great War had returned to the place where it all began. The Austro-Hungarian invasion of Serbia in 1914 had been a complete failure. The Serbs had won resounding victories at places like Cher and Drina, and the long Battle of Kolubara, which even saw the Austrians take Belgrade, though they only held it for 2 weeks, pushed the Imperial Army back out of Serbia with devastating losses. Well, it was now late 1915, and they were going to try again. Serbia was a major prize. Taking it would give the Austrians one fewer battlefront, and it would open up a direct rail supply link from Berlin to Constantinople. This time, it would begin with a combined Austro-German force under Germany's renowned August von Mackensen.
Love that hat. Love that hat. I swear, World War I Germany, Imperial Germany, has the best looking individual pieces of kit and decoration like throughout history. I love so much of their stuff. Even general stuff like the Pickelhaube is, just an iconic, great piece of kit.
He planned to attack Serbia at multiple points on its northern front, while secret negotiations were proceeding with the Bulgarian government about joining the war and then also the Serbian invasion from the east. His plan was simple. The newly reorganized Austro-Hungarian Third Army was to cross the Danube and the Sava west of Belgrade and take the high ground south of the Serbian capital. This would not only isolate the city, but also bind as many Serbian troops to it as possible. Mackensen well knew the importance of the White City for the honor and prestige of the Serbian people. At the same time, his 11th German Army under Max von Gallwitz would cross the Danube to the east of Belgrade and push further inward into the Morava Valley, threatening the main Serbian forces outside the capital and the city itself from the other side. While the Austro-Hungarians were the anvil, the German army was to be the hammer under which the Serbian army would receive the killing blow.
War begun, the Kaiser has come. Day or night the shells keep falling. Overrun, but never outdone. Street to street, denying defeat.
But the Serbs had time to prepare. Months had passed since the defeat of that 1914 invasion, and another attack on the capital was of course anticipated. Both the Danube and the Sava were major obstacles, and the Serbs readied their defenses. Mackensen had to hurry with his plans before the onset of bad autumn weather, and it was already late September when his forces reached Belgrade. After the taking of Temeziget, one of the biggest islands in the Sava, they made ready to storm the city. The assault troops were given extra ammunition and rations, with the knowledge that once the river crossing was made, supplies and reinforcements could not be guaranteed. On the 6th of October, the Central Powers artillery opened fire, bombarding the Serbian lines. Massive artillery, especially heavy howitzers, was the key component in Mackinson's
38 centimeter. Damn, that's a big gun.
plan. This was a lesson he had learned during the Gorlice-Tarnov offensive earlier in the year, where his heavy artillery repeatedly broke the Russian lines, forcing them back time and again. Also, in addition to the large amounts of heavy howitzers and Minenwerfer, the Austro-Hungarian river monitor Samos and other armored steamers of the Danube flotilla also opened fire. Soon, Belgrade and the Serbian positions were in flames as the Austro-Hungarian forces tried to cross the Danube. But Austrian Field Marshal Hermann Koves von Koveshasa had chosen poor spots for the crossing. The ground was swampy and the weather turned for the worse. A heavy rainstorm caused the Danube to swell. Bridgeheads were established, but progress was slow, as most of the pontoon bridges were destroyed by the Serbian artillery or simply swept away by the heavy current. Relentless Serbian counterattacks threatened to destroy the bridgeheads, and the Austro-Hungarians fought with their backs to the river. To assure a safe crossing of the main force, Koves had to take several islands in the river, particularly two islands the Germans named Zigeuner Inseln, Gypsy Islands, or the one they called Great War Island, at the conflux of the Sava and Danube rivers. These were all well fortified by the Serbian defenders, and camouflage machine guns covered every approach over the river, and they could only be taken by close combat. Even with the assistance of the German 22nd Reserve Corps, commanded by General Eugen von Falkenhayn, the German Army Chief of Staff's brother, progress was slow. Casualties among the assault troops were high.
Overrun, you're under the gun. Day and night the shells kept falling. Sound the drum, the great war has come. Show no fear, the ending is near.
But after hours of fighting, most of the Serbian guns defending the city were destroyed by the enemy artillery. The anti-aircraft batteries as well, allowing the German reconnaissance planes to direct fire even more efficiently. The eventual capture of the river islands was the turning point in the battle, as the crossings could now be made in relative safety and the artillery could be moved up. Fighting reached the old fortress of Kalemegdan. Belgrade could not hold out much longer, not without help from the Entente. French troops were en route from Salonika, but it was extremely doubtful they could arrive in time to help. Still,
Yeah, so you have this issue of the weather, right? So the Austro-Hungarians are having issues crossing the Danube because of weather, and the whole thing is they're trying to hurry, right? They're trying to hurry before the weather completely turns. That's an issue on the attack, but the same here. You see the distance the French have to cover. Weather is not on their side either. And so you see this a lot in World War I, where a lot of the things that are most devastating or hard to contend with actually are that way for both sides, right? And that's where some of the stories come from of, you know, kind of a quote-unquote ceasefire when like a trench floods, or you know what I mean, something like that, where both sides are in a terrible situation. There really isn't much they can do. They're miserable, cold, they're soaking wet, the trench is flooding, and so a lot of those situations aren't just bad for one side. It ends up being bad for both sides. And so just like, you know, the Austro-Hungarians and Germans are having to move quickly and they're struggling because of weather, same thing for the French.
Still, counterattacks were made wherever possible. So while the Austrians at Kalemegdan waited for reinforcements, the men of the Serbian 10th Infantry Regiment, under Major Dragutin Gavrilovic, prepared such a counterattack. They knew it was likely futile, but they planted their bayonets and prepared to at least delay the enemy from entering the city.
Damn.
This was the moment Major Dragutin Gavrilovic made his speech. Soldiers, exactly at 3 o'clock, The enemy is to be crushed by your fierce charge, destroyed by your grenades and bayonets. The honor of Belgrade, our capital, must not be stained. Soldiers, heroes, the Supreme Command has erased our regiment from its records. Our regiment has been sacrificed for the honor of Belgrade and the fatherland. Therefore, you no longer need to worry about your lives. They no longer exist. So forward to glory, for the king and the fatherland. Long live the king, long live Belgrade. The story goes that Gavrilovich men stuck flowers to their tunics taken from a flower shop nearby as they prepared to charge to their deaths. It was indeed heroic. Most of Gavrilovich's men were cut down by the Austro-Hungarian guns. Gavrilovich was badly wounded, though saved from death by other survivors, who dragged their major back from the fighting so that he, at least, could live to fight another day. The rest is history.
Soldiers, heroes, die for your land. Your lives are gonna raised by your command. Until your last dying.
On October 9th, Mackinson reported the fall of Belgrade. The relief force from Salonika never made it to the Serbs in time. Bulgaria declared war on Serbia October 14th, and the Austro-German-Bulgarian invasion brought victory to the Central Powers weeks later. Today, Gavrilovich's speech is etched into a monument near the Nebojsa Tower to commemorate their valiant last stand. The stand of...
That's awesome. That they have a memorial for it. That's awesome.
a defiant and proud people refusing to be cowed by an overwhelming force.
Until your last dying breath.
How did you hear the speech in the first place?
So, a very long time ago,
Yeah?
I happened to get acknowledged with a girl from Serbia.
Okay.
This was by the time Sabaton was formed. And we were kind of talking constantly. And she hoped that we would come there and play one day. Which I didn't think would ever be possible, because at this time there was a war. And in 2007, we come to Serbia for the first time.
Yeah?
And I meet with her.
Yeah.
She shows me around, takes me to the fortress, and tells stories about Belgrade's history.
Okay.
This was the first time I heard about Mayor Gavrilovich and the speech and the defense of Belgrade. Speech was all I needed to be inspired to write a song. So this song we've only performed once. We played in Serbia, in Belgrade, and as a special treat, we had the speech pre-recorded by a famous Serbian actor. And it was magic for us to hear, because all the people in the crowd, they could scream along to these words.
They knew the whole thing.
They knew
Yeah.
the words by
Yeah.
heart.
Wow.
And we were standing backstage and listening to this, and we were full of tears just
Yeah.
before we're gonna play the song, because
Yeah, that would have been awesome to witness. I can't imagine. That would have been the coolest thing ever.
we knew how much this speech, this history, meant for the people out there. And when we walk out there to play that song, this was one of the absolute highlights of our entire career playing a song.
Wow. And ladies and gentlemen, Last Dying Breath.
Vi nemate više da se brinete za živote vaše. Oni više ne postoje. Zato napred u slavu za kralja i otadžbinu. Živeo kralj! Živeo Beograd!
And that was Last Dying Breath,
See you next time.
here on Sabaton History.
Until your last dying breath.
Yeah, that's the whole thing is just a really, really incredible story. Serbia is really a thorn in the side of the Germans, by extension of the Austro-Hungarians. They pull Bulgaria into the war. They have to send troops down there. The Austro-Hungarians are just the worst. They are just the worst. I talked about this in the song, and I've talked about it a handful of times, but golly, Germany's allies in the war are just, they drew the short straw for sure, with the Ottomans and the Austro-Hungarians. They just weren't what they used to be. right? They were dying empires. They were on their last leg, and the war is really what highlighted Austro-Hungaria's shortcomings and how far it had fallen. And the thing that showed that the quickest and kind of brightest was Serbia. Because, like I said, the whole thing is just based on Serbia being taken quickly. And when it isn't, when the Austro-Hungarians sort of get embarrassed down there, it really puts a glaring light on where the Austro-Hungarian Empire is at this time. So really, really interesting. One of the other things that I wanted to read before I get off is there was a letter. I found it on a couple of different sites, and I wanted to read it real quick. It's very interesting to me. So during this offensive, right, the one that was just covered for Last Dying Breath on the offensive to take Belgrade, there was a Austro-Hungarian that died, right? He was Lieutenant Colonel August Schmidt. When he was killed after one of the battles, he was found with an unopened letter on him. The Serbs thought that the letter was an official document, so they opened it to see what it was, and it was a letter to his daughter. They sent the daughter a letter back. It says, quote, "Dear Miss, with a heavy heart and pain in my soul, although we are enemies, we are forced to be the first to tell you the sad news that your undead father, a hero officer and commander of the 32nd Austrian Regiment, today heroically fell at the head of his regiment, defending his emperor, his country, and his flag, and in a hard fight on Serbian soil. Even though you have lost your father, you have to be proud of him because he fell heroically and worthy of a knight hero in the field of honor. At the same time, we inform you that with today's referral, we send you 4,000 crowns, which we found in your late father's pocket with a letter, and we ask you to inform us about the receipt of this money because we care a lot to receive both money and letter. We buried your father with dignity, with all honors, marking his grave with an exemplary crusader, so that when war operations are over and peace is established, you can come to Serbia with your respected family and find your father's body decently buried and the grave preserved. Receive our most sincere knightly condolences that God may give you and others a long and happy life." I'm not going to read the other part, but there was a response letter basically thanking them. That's I don't know, the speech, that letter, it's a very interesting mindset, I guess. I don't know. The Serbs are in a very, very bad spot from the second that the Archduke dies. Right when Archduke Ferdinand is killed, the Serbs are in the crosshairs of major European powers. And the way that they sort of handle it, I don't know. I don't know. It's very interesting, and it's very almost kind of like hopeful, if that makes any sense at all. And I talk about this a lot with some of the smaller countries that are that are brought into a war that they really don't have a chance in, right? We cover this with the Winter War with Finland and the Soviet Union, with Germany invading Belgium at the start of World War One, and then with Serbia and the Austro-Hungarians, and then eventually the Germans go down there too. I have a ton of respect for the countries that are pulled into a war that they really have no business being in, and they fight it all the same, tooth and nail, like to the last. It's really, really a cool part of history. It's a cool part of human history. it's one of those things that, like, if somebody that didn't know anything, about history or humanity or anything, and wanted to know kind of what people were capable of, these are situations that would show, at the extremes what humanity is capable of in the most dire of circumstances. So I really like these stories. They're some of my favorite historical stories, but the song was great. The episode was great. Sabaton always does a great job. But that was Last Dying Breath, the Defense of Belgrade. As always, like, comment, subscribe. Help me keep building the channel over here. I'll put the Discord link in the description box down below, and I'll see you all next time.